So recently I was arguing with my roommate on why I thought he should step outside his comfort zone with art. Well, we were specifically talking about movies, but I think the argument applies to all forms of art. I said he should expose himself to something with a bit more depth. I was watching the Ingmar Bergman film Persona, and he always talks about his love for Transformers, which is not exactly an easy gap to bridge. He argued that he found Transformers exciting and stimulating, whilst he found Persona boring and confusing. Now, I know this type of video draws the attention of a lot of high art snobs, so I'll say in his defense, he's not wrong. This is just his opinion. He's not stating any objective facts. These are just his subjective opinions. And he followed that up with a point, a very good one. He said, I find this boring and it makes no sense to me, so why would I waste my time watching it? And I went, I don't know. Or at least I can't articulate why I believe you should. Which is a very distressing idea to plant in the mind of an inspiring filmmaker who someday hopes to create something very moving. Why would we spend our leisure time enduring something that we don't enjoy? The answer is we wouldn't. Do I even like these films? Yeah, I do. I love them, but I'll admit I didn't always. I think comprehending art is a skill, and like any skill, it requires some practice before you get good at it. But why should we climatize our artistic palette to liking something that requires more attention and more effort than, say, something that can just be put on and enjoyed straight away by anyone? And before we go any further, let's stop calling this high art and this low art. The whole concept of high art came about when elitist aristocrats decided they didn't want smelly poor people to ever be on the same intellectual level that they were. That's impossible because intelligence and socioeconomic status aren't directly correlated. But art easily accessible to the masses was seen as lowbrow, and something that only the rich could experience was high art. Yeah, so making segregations in art had similar intentions to segregations in people. It was entirely to keep poor people, people of colour, and immigrants under, so to speak, in the human dominance hierarchy. It not only made rich people feel better about themselves, but it also helped maintain the divide. In his book Highbrow, Lowbrow, The Emergence of Cultural Hierarchy in America, Lawrence W. Levine writes, the emerging distinction between high and low culture was based in part on an evaluation of the difference between unique and mass-produced objects. Basically, something like the nuance to a theatre performance, which will be slightly different every time, is seen as higher culture than something like a film which will play exactly the same every time. If it can be accessed by all, then it's no longer high art. It's simply an object of mass culture, or at least that was the belief, which we now know is completely wrong. I hope we now know that that's completely wrong. So let's not be elitist, let's not gatekeep art, let's let everybody in, let's enjoy it, let's make it as inclusive as possible. I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but back to acclimatizing our artistic palettes. I want to bring up wine, specifically red wine, specifically Shiraz, because I think it's an example everyone will be able to recognize. And I think I should probably drink some for this segment of the video. So I've got some here. I think this is as good an excuse as any. Now I'm going to have to pick that up. This isn't actually Shiraz, by the way. This is Grenache. I couldn't find any Shiraz. So, sorry. No one likes Shiraz when they first drink it. Well, some say they do. They're liars. To a new drinker, it's abrasive, it's extremely acidic, there's almost no nuance to its flavour. When you first drink it, it just kind of burns and it's got a real vinegary note to it. So why the hell do people drink it if it's so seemingly terrible? Because it's not. It's great. It just takes some acquiring a taste for it. Also, some people will drink anything if it'll get them drunk. During Prohibition times in America, it wasn't uncommon to drink botanical-infused denatured alcohol. That is the modern equivalent of buying a bottle of methylated spirits, filling it with some juniper berries, and just having at it. Yeah, a lot of them went blind. Many died. If that's not proof people drink anything to get pissed, I don't know what is. What were we discussing again? Yeah, Shiraz. So why would anyone go through the process of acquiring a taste if the process is unenjoyable? Well, because those who go through the process get to reap the rewards later. The more you work on your palate, the more the acidic, abrasive, tart, convoluted mess in your mouth becomes one that is rich, juicy, and hopefully smooth, depending on the wine. Once you get really good at it, you might even be able to start to pull specific notes like sweet red fruits, pepper, olive, smoke, and that's a really enjoyable experience. Your counter argument might be, hey, well, I drink vodka and orange juice, and that tastes great. I love it. And I never had to get used to that. I enjoyed it the very first time I tried it. Why would I go through the process of sitting through Persona when I enjoy the hell out of Transformers? That's a great point, my unadventurous friend. So I would like to propose a concept called Delicacy. So, a dude named David Hume wrote a series of essays in the mid-1700s on taste and passion. In his very first entry, Part 1, Essay 1, he writes, "There is a delicacy of taste observable in some men. When you present a poem or a picture to a man possessed of this talent, the delicacy of his feeling makes him be sensibly touched with every part of it, nor are the masterly strokes perceived with more exquisite relish and satisfaction than the negligences or absurdities with disgust and uneasiness. A polite and judicious conversation affords him the highest entertainment. Rudeness or impertinence is as great a punishment to him. In short, delicacy enlarges the sphere of both our happiness and our misery, and makes us sensitive to pains as well as pleasures, which escape the rest of mankind." So, in a very wordy, elegant way, he's saying that people who make an effort to refine their tastes of these varying forms of art feel much greater pleasure whilst experiencing said art than people who haven't clarified their tastes. So basically, a wine sommelier has a mental orgasm every time he drinks an incredible wine, a feeling that someone who didn't possess delicacy would never be able to even fathom. They don't possess the raw tools required to even conceptualize the sensation. A movie critic feels so much more engaged and developed by a celluloid masterpiece than, say, someone who watches 4 movies a year. But the unfortunate reality of delicacy is that whilst it increases our perception of pleasure, it also increases our perception of pain, so to speak. That same film critic wouldn't be able to stand a poorly made film. His or her disdain for it would be almost unbearable.
Jim! Call 911! Jim, how could you have done this? Jim! I can't believe you committed suicide. I cannot believe you committed suicide. How could you have done this? How could you have committed suicide?
The wine sommelier couldn't bear the taste of a bad wine. He or she would sooner tip it down the sink than drink it, regardless of the cost. I'm not a wine sommelier, and I would sooner drink no wine than bad wine, so this one makes a lot of sense to me personally. Quick side note, I don't want it to seem like I'm encouraging hedonism. One is expanding your mind, and the other is just being gluttonous. Don't spend all day every day of your life watching movies and drinking wine. I promise that the benefits you gain in your understanding of those forms of art will be heavily outweighed by the negative effects of that kind of lifestyle. Part 9. I'm a hypocrite. Now, I think we've reached a point where we hopefully agree that furthering our understanding and sharpening our tastes is a good thing. It's kind of making me think, what if there's some incredible pleasure not yet known to mankind because it's so initially shitty that not a single soul on this earth has stuck it out? Anyway, the actual topic that inspired this essay in the first place was surrealism, because my feelings towards it kind of make me a hypocrite. I'll be honest, I've never really given it the time of day. I've turned off many films before they even reached their final act because the surrealist elements became too prevalent, and honestly, surrealism is a movement that's always pissed me off. Why has it pissed me off? Well, mostly due to my ignorance surrounding it. It's always confused the hell out of me, which doesn't sit well with me because I'm massive on approaching something with an open mind. And if I don't like it initially, but it's held in high regard historically, then I feel as if I should at least give it more of a chance and see if I can't find something I like about it. That mindset to me is less about conformity and more about an acknowledgement of my own shortcomings as a person. Sure, I think I'm reasonably intelligent. I can usually follow along with something and comprehend it reasonably well. But if a large congregation of people all agree on the sublimity of a particular piece of art, and said piece of art has proven itself to be extremely influential, inspiring other works, and standing the test of time itself, then chances are I missed something. Chances are I'm human and therefore prone to various errors associated with my comprehension. But that's where surrealism is interesting, because comprehension may not even play a part. Some surrealist art refuses to be comprehended. It doesn't want to be understood. It consciously chooses to alienate its audience. As someone with a very logical mind who's always trying to find the deeper meaning in things, that doesn't make any sense to me. Doesn't a refusal to attempt some kind of subtext in a piece of art make it superficial and to a certain degree objectively worse than something that does try? I don't know. It's very hard to comment on art objectively in any manner when there's a chance that nothing is real at all. I think seeking to justify the existence of an entire movement would be a foolish thing to do without first gaining a pretty solid understanding of said movement. So that's what I did. Premiere Pro updated. But that's where surrealism is. So that's what I did. And now I'm going to try and condense about a week of research into one segment of this video. So feel free to call me out if I've made any errors. I'm not an art historian. I'm a kid who did some superficial research to have a basic enough grasp of something to talk about it. Before I move on to Surrealism, it would be imprecise to not first mention Dadaism or Dadaism. You're probably thinking, Reed, you claim to have spent a week researching this and you don't even know how to pronounce it properly? I now question the assiduousness and validity of your research. I would agree. But the malleable pronunciation and even definition of Dadaism is kind of the point. See, Dadaism, whatever, I'm going to call it Dadaism from here on out. Dadaism is somewhat of an anti-art movement. It started in a cute little cabaret nightclub in Zurich, in Switzerland. The club was known as Cabaret Voltaire. Why Switzerland, though? Well, this was around February 1916. So there was a bit of a war going on, and Dada's founding members all crossed paths when they fled their own countries throughout Europe to a nice neutral zone. In a whirlwind of political opposition to war and what I believe was anger and trauma-induced nihilism, to be perfectly honest, these founding members all agreed that every decision and action that led us to this point in human history was thought about, at least a little. Logic and reasoning led us to an atrocious war that had already claimed the lives of thousands and had a devastating effect on the entire world. So, what if we all just stopped thinking? Now earlier I mentioned it was a bit of an anti-art movement, but during my research I forced myself to actually read the Dada Manifesto, and its writer was clearly against the idea of Dadaism being categorized as a movement. I disagree. It absolutely was a movement, a very short movement at that, but I thought I'd at least mention the writer's argument against its categorization, even if I believe that that argument is wrong. And while we're on the topic of his manifesto, it reads like the scribblings of someone going through a psychotic episode. I'll try and keep this brief. So he opens his manifesto with, "To put out a manifesto, you must want ABC to fulminate against 1, 2, 3. Sure. A little further down, he states, "To impose your ABC is a natural thing, hence deplorable." He then goes on to contradict the existence of his manifesto by writing, "I write a manifesto and I want nothing, yet I..." Actually, no, sorry, that is not an I. That is a 1. Okay, yep, I'm just going to read that as it's written then. "I write a manifesto and I want nothing, yet 1 say certain things, and in principle I am against manifestos, as I am also against principles. I am neither for nor against, and I do not explain because I hate common sense." He then criticizes Christianity and the commandments for a bit. Then he states, "A work of art is never beautiful by decree, objectively and for all." Sure. Hence, criticism is useless, debatable. He goes on for a further couple of pages talking honestly nonsense. An argument in his defense might be that the manifesto itself wants to be labeled as Dadaist art. That's probably the case, but this doesn't change my negative feelings towards it. It could end by saying the end, or maybe fin, maybe even thanks for reading, maybe just regards, but no, it doesn't. It ends with one word: life. I'm not even taking it out of context. There is none. Dadaism had a pretty short time in the spotlight. The previously mentioned Cabaret Voltaire was home to some Dada shows, which predominantly featured poem readings. That sounds pretty normal, right? Until you find out how to write a Dada poem. Step 1, cut out all the words in a newspaper page. Step 2, put all of those words into a bag and shake. Step 3, pull out the words one by one. There you have it, a Dadaist poem.
Ioli panto bambla, o pauli bambla, rosija empahambla hor, egiga fora.
At the very first International Dada Art Fair in Berlin, artists Rudolf Schlittler, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, and John Hartfield tied a life-size doll to the ceiling. The doll was dressed as a soldier and had a papier-mâché pig's head. They called it the Prussian Archangel. It probably seems like I hate Dadaism and everything to come of it. I do think a lot of it is a complete load of bullshit, don't get me wrong. But there's a lot of Dadaist art, or art that was inspired by Dadaism, that I think is really super cool. One sub-movement, led by Jean Arp, was to drop abstract pieces of paper onto a canvas and glue them where they landed. This yielded some really interesting results, and I think the style of thinking that led to this practice, to create art almost autonomously and as organically and naturally as possible, is the same train of thought that gave life to Surrealism, but more about that later. Another art movement that trickled down from Dadaism was photomontage. This was to cut out images and pieces of text and rearrange them through collage to create what was usually a very subversive message. A German artist named Hannah Hoch led the charge with her incredibly political and often feminist works. But, without a doubt, the best idea to have come out of Dadaism, at least in my opinion, was an idea started by the legendary Marcel Duchamp. Anything and everything can be art if the artist chooses to make it so. You're probably familiar with his most famous piece called The Fountain. You're probably thinking, how on earth did a signed urinal change the face of modern art? Well, I'm watering it down here, but basically, the urinal was a piece of art because Duchamp chose to make it so. In doing so, he gave birth to the idea that is now common consensus, that an artist has the intellectual ability and power to make anything art if they damn well choose to. This seemingly inconsequential idea completely changed the face of modern art. It reassured artists that they could completely liberate their works and operate as freely as they felt like. Anything can be art if the artists choose to call it that. Well done. You made it. You've reached the part of the essay that actually inspired its inception in the first place. I'd planned to write an essay on surrealism, with the idea being that I would start the essay by admitting that I can't stand surrealism, then hopefully through research and watching a wide range of surreal works, I would be able to find something that I liked, or better still, take on a whole new appreciation for the movement. That's still the plan, I just didn't expect to be over 3,000 words in and not even started on the main topic the essay is about. So let's waste no time, let's get into it. I should probably start with what I've already been exposed to. I'll start with the ones I've liked and we'll move down. Mulholland Drive. I'll be perfectly honest, during this I wasn't exactly sure what was going on. But something about the hypnotic mood was so pleasing to me. It felt like a puzzle that was evolving as you were trying to solve it.
He's using a polymorphic engine to mutate the code. It's like solving a Rubik's Cube that's fighting back.
Another surrealist film that I believe is worthy of being praised for its haunting atmosphere is Synecdoche, New York. I'm not even going to say anything more, it's just existentially terrifying and it is incredibly well written. If you've seen anything by Charlie Kaufman, it's kind of in that vein of existential dread, but layers to the horror. The discreet charm of the bourgeoisie. This was my introduction to Louis Buñuel. Louise Buñuel? I'm not sure. I found this movie to be really fun. At a first glance, it's about a group of rich people who just want to sit down and eat some food together, but they continually get interrupted by increasingly ridiculous situations.
De me présenter. Je m'appelle Hubert de Rochequin, je suis lieutenant de cavalerie. Puis-je m'asseoir à cette table?
Mais...
Mon enfance à moi était tragique. Vous permettez que je vous la raconte?
Là maintenant?
Oui.
Mesdames, Messieurs, bonsoir. Veuillez nous excuser.
Mais là-bas, et la nourriture.
Qu'est-ce que c'est que cette plaisanterie?
But beneath the light-hearted exterior, the film has some serious depth to it, spearheading the aristocrats and their vain, hedonistic ways and the general ignorance that they have towards any socio-political issues that don't directly affect themselves. And it does all that through the disorientating lens of subjectivity. The interwoven dream sequences blur the chronology to such an extent that the whole timeline seems completely arbitrary. Is this scene even happening, or are we just witnessing the delusions of one of these fools? Is this just a deeper level of artifice? I've seen plenty more that could definitely fall into the surrealism basket, so for the sake of conciseness, I'll mention the three films that come to mind. The first is El Topo. I really don't even know where to start with this film. I can't stand it. It is an incomprehensible mess created by a director who I believe is a raving narcissist. A director that knew his fans would just assume that any part that seemed nonsensical or arbitrary was clearly just operating on an intellectual level that a mere mortal would never reach. I don't like Jodorowsky at all, which was only made worse after I watched this absurdly self-indulgent doco about a work he never even made.
When you make a picture, you must not respect the novel. It's like you get married. Why? The woman is white. You take the woman. If you respect the woman, you will never have child. You need to open the costume and to rape the bride. and then you will have your picture. I was raping Frank Heber, raping like this, but with love, with love.
House. Now, I know that this one has a massive fan base, and there are some critics that I hugely respect that have made excellent cases on why this is great. But I couldn't enjoy it. Nothing made any sense to me, and I found it really hard to stay focused on. I think this is an example where my previous comment applies. But if a large congregation of people all agree on the sublimity of a particular piece of art, and said piece of art has proven itself to be extremely influential, inspiring other works, and standing the test of time itself, then chances are I missed something. The final film I'm going to mention is one that I've thought about constantly, even though I watched it in March 2019, way back when. The Happiness of the Categories. This movie is unlike anything I've ever seen before. Insanity is not a strong enough word to describe whatever the hell is going on here. So, to give a brief synopsis, this film is a musical, heavily inspired by The Sound of Music, but it's also a mystery and a horror. This is how Letterboxd describes it. The Katakuri family has just opened their guest house in the mountains. Unfortunately, their first guest commits suicide, and in order to avoid trouble, they decide to bury him in the backyard. Things get way more complicated when their second guest, a famous sumo wrestler, dies while having sex with his underage girlfriend, and the grave behind the house starts to fill up more and more. The film then becomes a zombie film, briefly, before reverting back to a musical. I found it a mammoth achievement to actually finish the whole thing. I had a feeling afterwards that I think would be similar to someone who finished Satan Tango. I just never thought it would end. Okay, so now that I've talked about the films that led me to have a distaste for surrealism, I'm going to try and understand it better so that maybe I'll change my mind. Remember a few minutes ago when I went on a huge tangent about Dadaism? Well, now I'm going to explain why that was relevant. Dadaism led to the inception of Surrealism. As Dadaism began to fade into irrelevancy, one of the original Dadaists, Breton, started a new school of thought. If Dadaism was about not thinking and letting one's art be as organic and free as possible, Surrealism was in a similar vein, but more about tapping into one's psyche and trying to articulate what was going on in the artist's head beneath the surface thought. That's why Surrealist works are so often described as dreamlike, because dreams might be the best access point we have to understand the human subconscious. That's what Sigmund Freud believed, at least. And while I'm on the topic of Freud, Breton was a huge fan of the man's work, obsessed even. He is said to have begun Surrealism after being interested and inspired by Freud's work on psychoanalysis and dream interpretation. But rather than using psychoanalysis as a method of treatment for people who were struggling, the Surrealists were interested only in using it as a vehicle for creativity. In his 1924 Surrealism Manifesto, Breton famously describes Surrealism as psychic automatism in its pure state, by which one proposes to express verbally by means of the written word or in any other manner the actual functioning of thought, dictated by the thought in the absence of any control exercised by reason, exempt from any aesthetic or moral concern. So, Surrealist art didn't have to abide by any aesthetic or moral obligations. It made no apologies. It was an articulation of our innermost thoughts and desires, completely unadulterated and unmoderated by any conscious-minded thinking or concept of what was morally right or wrong. In 1921, Breton went to Vienna to meet Freud, where they discussed artistic expressions of Freud's work on psychoanalysis and dreams. Freud reportedly showed little to no interest. So basically, Breton was like, hey dude, I'm thinking of creating an entire art movement that will inspire generations of artists and remain relevant for over a century. And I'm thinking of dedicating the whole thing to you and how much you inspired me. And Freud was like, thanks, I hate it. Breton then went on to describe him as an old man without elegance. Then he went home and tore down all these Freud posters. Alrighty. It's a different day. You probably noticed that it's a different day. It's a new day. Hello, rat. It's a new day. You probably noticed that by my changing of clothes, and you also probably noticed by the different area I'm in. I thought, why not? Let's change it up a little bit. So, where the hell were we? Well, without a doubt, the most important figure in the movement was the great Salvador Dali. You probably know him as cool mustache guy, but he was way more than that. He was a painter with many famous works that have stood the test of time. He was also a reasonably well-selling author. He was also almost the highest paid actor in human history, thanks to Hodorowski.
With love.
He also had a pet ocelot that he reportedly took with him everywhere he went, and I think he also briefly owned an anteater that he would walk in public. I'll pull up a photo of him walking his anteater because I just think it is one of the coolest photos I have ever seen.
But he is a man who once said about himself, the only difference between myself and a madman is that I am not mad. How do you do? Well, I think you've caught something. I can't help noticing that you have an anteater with you.
The reason I bring up Dali is because he co-wrote the screenplay that is believed to be the first surrealist film ever created, directed by the aforementioned Louis Buñuel. The first film I watched in my efforts to better understand surrealism was Un Chien, Andalou. You're probably curious why my boom pole looks so weird, don't you? Did you think I was going to bring it up at any point? I couldn't afford a boom mic, so I bought a broom handle and some plumbing, and I kind of just made one out of some weird stuff. I know what you're thinking. Pretty cool, Reed, and I agree. I think it is pretty cool. It cost me like $22, which is just a bargain. Can you please get out of the way? Please? Please? Ow. So this film is insane even by today's standards. I can't even begin to imagine how alien it must have felt in 1929. Everything about the short seems to actively deny artistic categorization, as if it knew that it was starting to lead in one direction, so it threw a spanner in its own works to do its best to throw its viewers. Being co-written by Louis Buñuel and Salvador Dali, it's really no wonder why this is seen as such a cornerstone of surrealist culture, retrospectively. They both went on to be incredible artists with countless masterpieces, but from everything I've read, it seems like this was hailed almost instantly upon its release. It didn't take 90 years for it to finally be accepted as a masterpiece. No, it seems like it was revered as soon as it released, which really surprised me. And apparently it surprised Dali and Buñuel too. I know this because I read that they carried sacks of rocks in their pockets on opening night as self-defense, expecting a negative response from the audience. They were disappointed when the audience enjoyed the film, making the evening less exciting, according to Salvador Dali. Stop it. Don't chew my mic. During my research, I found shockingly that both of the leading roles in this film died by their own hands. Batchev died of a Veronal overdose, which I believe is an anti-anxiety/anti-insomnia pill. And in 1954, the leading lady, Merrill, committed self-immolation by dousing herself in petrol and burning to death. She did this in a public square in France. None of that has anything to do with this essay, but I just thought it was kind of noteworthy. Okay, so where am I now on the love-hate spectrum for surrealism? I'd say I'm right in the middle, which is cool because before starting and understanding this short, I was probably way over here. Through gaining a bit of a deeper understanding of the process behind the art, I'm starting to see its merit. Carl Jung famously talked about a truly good person having to understand the darkness and evil they're capable of. Basically, if you claim to be a good person, but don't realize your own capacity for evil, then you're merely naive. Or to use another example, everyone's a good person when life is simple.
Nobody panics when things go according to plan, even if the plan is horrifying.
Shake up someone's life and introduce a bit of chaos and you'll see whether they're truly good. Someone's true colors will come out when they're thrown into a crisis. Someone who has never been in a crisis has no way of knowing how they would react. A lot of boxers have a very clear plan of how a fight is going to play out, and that plan might get completely thrown out the window the second they get punched in the head. Look, I've strayed far away from Jung's actual comments on the shadow, but I'm just trying to communicate in a way that I understand it. And keep in mind, Jung was an alarmingly intelligent man, much more so than myself, so I could be completely misinterpreting his points. If you're interested in exploring his ideas yourself, I'll recommend reading the Red Book and Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. To the best of my knowledge, these are the two that best explore the concept of the shadow. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I've read them. They are way out of my depth. I only know they explore the shadow from my research online. So Jung's thinking that led to the shadow came from an understanding of Freud's work on the subconscious, and whilst they disagreed on some pretty important details, they both allude to one's, I'm going to say humanity, but you could probably use the word psyche or soul even, being more whole if they attempt to integrate the subconscious. Jung fairly simply called the shadow whatever we don't want to know about ourselves, hence why I'm including it in the umbrella of the subconscious. So if we can make ourselves more whole by understanding the depths of our innermost thoughts and attempting to articulate them through our art, could not only be beneficial for our psychology, but it's also extraordinarily brave. To allow a little piece of ourselves to be consumed by the masses must be surely daunting. To attempt to express what is going on in our very souls and to do it in an unadulterated manner, such as surrealist filmmaking that doesn't allow us anywhere to hide, being metaphorically naked, having every dark or embarrassing part of your psyche on full display is nothing to take lightly. And the same goes for the viewer. Not only could it be a seriously transformative experience to swim around in the marsh of another human subconscious, but it could also be very beneficial. I think it's an important function of many pieces of art to create unity, maybe to show someone who's struggling that they're not the only one. Why is depressing music such a huge genre? Maybe it's because there's so many depressed people and it's comforting to know that there's other people who feel as inadequate as you do. But what about the things that discomfort us that aren't as easily enunciated as depression? What about the things that we can't quite explain because we don't even fully understand them about ourselves? I find it very difficult to reminisce, even if it's a good memory, because of a weird, existentially terrifying idea that I can't seem to ignore, but I also can't seem to explain. I think it's that I'm worried that life may never be that joyful again, and that I wasn't aware enough at the time that I was living such a good moment and I wasted it, which causes issue whenever I try and enjoy something now, because I'm so focused on trying to relish in the moment and enjoy it before it's gone that I get panicked and ruin the moment. I can't properly explain why I do that. My best guess is that something is floating around my unconscious mind that's causing distress. What is it? I don't know. But imagine if I could express that in some way through art. Maybe a short film. I think that could be an incredible experience. For one, for me, it might help me alleviate some of that mental despair. And two, on the off chance that someone somewhere ever struggled with the same thing or even similar, they might find it deeply comforting to know that they're not alone. Some of you are probably thinking, sure, but all art does that to a certain extent. Why do we have to get into absurdist territory to make people feel understood? Well, we don't, but the more specific the issue, the more personal the experience will be for an audience. Your favourite movies are most likely films that tackle themes or ideas that you feel very personally connected to. That's why they're your favourite. That's not necessarily always the case, but I think it's a fairly safe generalisation. The next film I watched was a 3-minute ad for Rick and Morty.
All right, Morty, can you put this on the shelf? Don't drop it. I'm not an idiot, Rick. I'm not gonna drop... here we go.
I loved every second of it. Watching it after Chien Andalou was genuinely rewarding too, because you can see the evolution of the movement. I think animation is such a great way of doing surrealism because you're limited exclusively by your creativity. All the different art styles on display here were so satisfying to watch, and the little joke at the end did make me chuckle.
Whatever. There goes the next half hour of my life.
Rick and Morty.
I think it's undeniable at this point that all of the pre-World War II surrealist films had a tangible effect on the media we consume today, and I think that's pretty awesome. It's crazy to think about the indestructibility and longevity of ideas that we connect to personally enough. For example, look no further than the Bible. Our society's values and principles are still heavily informed by something written nearly 3,500 years ago. Our very concept of what is right and wrong, our justice system that dictates how many individuals will spend the remainder of their lives, is built on the Bible, which speaks volumes about the perceived quality of information contained in that book. can cause some ruffles to be feathered. Some ruffles to be feathered. I was going to go into why ideas being bulletproof can be a good thing for society and why it can also be a very bad thing. However, the religious subtext of my reasoning could cause some feathers to be ruffled. I can see this being very divisive. Yeah, I'm not touching this. Sorry, but I'm not trying to start a controversy. I'm just trying to inform and start a healthy discussion. If you're interested in delving into what I was going to discuss, just Google same-sex marriage. The next film I watched was A Pigeon Sat on a Branch Reflecting on Existence. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful. This is a 2014 film created by Roy Anderson. It's a very black comedy that has some absurdist elements, but it's a surrealist film. Now, my decision to call it that probably has a few viewers scratching their heads, but hear me out. It doesn't have the kaleidoscopic acid trip visual palette that a lot of surrealist films have, but that's never been a condition of entry to the Surrealism party. This film functions on many surreal levels. I think the most immediately apparent is the combination of set design, costuming, and makeup. Everything about the marriage of these components is designed to connotate lifelessness. Not only do the settings look devoid of any vitality, but so do the characters in them. They look dead. It's as if they were emulating humanity, but not as we know it. I think it's best described by going back to Andre Breton's definition of surrealism. In the absence of any control exercised by reason, exempt from any aesthetic or moral concern. I want to focus on the last point there, exempt from any aesthetic or moral concern. That is a perfect explanation of this film. The way characters act seems to be completely unfiltered by social norms or even basic respect. Every character in this film is a sociopath, acting on their innermost desires, you could say, autonomously. For example, there's a scene where a woman is in a hospital bed. She's clearly about to kick the bucket. A man arrives. We learn it's her son. He's confused to see his mother holding a bag. We learn the bag contains over $70,000 and some jewelry. She wants to take it with her into the afterlife by being buried with it. Now, from a logical standpoint, this is ridiculous. You can't take your possessions with you beyond the grave. But from a humanity standpoint, this is her dying wish, and we should surely honour it. Out of respect. This film shows us what would happen if humanity was never a factor.
Ja, där ser du.
Man får inte ta med sig det här till...
I think the cherry on top of this scene is that the two siblings seem to be upset, possibly due to the harsh way their brother is treating their mother. But as the scene progresses, it becomes clear that the reason they're annoyed is that they've already tried to remove the bag, but the damn old woman just won't let it go.
Får inte ta med sig det här!
Or in another scene, where a man dies on a cruise, presumably from a heart attack. Now, in any other film, the scene that would follow would show the staff trying to contact his loved ones, maybe find the cause of death, maybe show the psychological effect it had on the onlookers. But in this film, the conflict in this scene is none of the above. The conflict comes from the fact that the now dead man already paid for his meal.
Får jag fråga en sak?
Ja.
Hur gör vi med det här nu då?
Hur menar du?
Ja, han har ju betalat.
Bra fråga.
Well, we can't charge for it twice, so we'd better give it away.
En räksmörgås och en stor starköl. Gratis.
Jag kan ta ölen.
Ja, varsågod.
This is horrible, but something about the sincerity of the man's thanks who gained a beer in this transaction was really funny to me.
Tack så mycket.
Thanks a lot. This world that Anderson has created feels like some real-world logic applies, but not all. It's grounded in reality while simultaneously being completely nonsensical. There was something really enjoyable about watching people act in a way they wanted to, regardless of basic human decency. The film showed me how far surrealism can be stretched if you just skew your perspective a tad. The next film I watched was also the last. Why was it the last? Well, because I absolutely love it, and it has single-handedly changed my opinion on surrealism. This film I'm talking about is a 1985 Japanese subversive masterpiece. I think I'd better drink some Japanese whiskey because this is a Japanese film. Yeah, that's as good of an excuse as any. I am so glad that I chose this film to watch next. I plan to better understand Surrealism and possibly tolerate it a little better. But after seeing this film, I'm now going to go out of my way to watch films that fall into the Surrealism category. Now that I see what they can be capable of, my opinion has permanently changed. That makes me pretty happy about the progression of this essay. The film I'm talking about is Tampopo. Tampopo is a self-described ramen western, which sounds pretty outlandish, but it's a pretty fitting description. The story, at its core, is one of being an amateur and being okay with that. My interpretation of the message that this film's director, Yuzo Itami, is trying to convey is that if you put your ego aside and allow yourself to be taught, the growth you're capable of can be astonishing. Our protagonist Tampopo is honestly so likeable from the get-go. We're told that she owns a ramen shop because she inherited it after her husband died. Now, to honour what he started, she just wants to make the shop a successful one. She's told that her ramen sucks, and her response is to automatically take the criticism as constructive and ask how it can suck less. This woman has no ego. None. All she wants to do all film is just make good ramen. The reason I'm even calling this film surrealist is because of the way it's told. We follow one main storyline, but after most scenes, we cut to these incredibly strange, dreamy vignettes. All of them use food in peculiar ways. Most of them are quite off-putting and cringe. I think Itami wants to spearhead the people who gatekeep enjoyment and attempt to dictate how we should be experiencing pleasure. From the man clearly loving his noodles and slurping them loudly, to the woman feeling the texture of all the food in the store. I get the message behind this scene, but it makes me so uncomfortable seeing her touching all the food. Stop touching the food. Please, stop. Stop! And don't even get me started on the egg yolk being passed between lovers. Yuck. A weirdly effective technique to make all of these vignettes feel dreamy is the way they end. It's this super cartoonish zoop. I can't really describe it other than just a zoop. I honestly loved every one of those bizarre cutaways, but this film shines in its main plot. It takes the Seven Samurai approach of giving us a small subplot to get to know a character, then adds them to the dynamic we've got going. The process of adding characters slowly makes the team feel like a small family by the end. So later in the film, when they react to certain situations, it feels very consistent with the preconceived notions we have about them. When we cut to Giro in the bathtub and he's got his cowboy hat on, it's quite humorous because it's just such a gyro thing to do. This film is quite funny. It takes a lot of our expectations and distills comedy from subverting those expectations. There's so much quirky fun to enjoy in this film, but that's almost dismissive of the extremely, at times, philosophical nature of the film. I want to highlight this fight scene. For one, this is such a loving ode to Japanese noir, and for two, once they both finish the fight, the level of philosophically dense storytelling that's shown when both men look at the sky, wow. And that results in the two developing mutual respect, and they're great friends from that point onwards. What a moment! We have reached the end. This is my little conclusion. I've learned a lot of cool stuff in the process of making this video. It's been a really rewarding experience, honestly. I think my main takeaway is that it's important to really give something a chance before you dismiss it. Before the process of this essay, I did not like surrealism, but through some pretty intense research and plenty of movie watching, I've grown to love this film movement. I hope you guys have taken something away from this video. I'm planning on making more of these. Don't expect one anytime soon. This one's been like a month in the process, partly because the research was pretty intense and partly because I've been doing a lot of other stuff. Like it hasn't been a month of full-time work. Don't get that twisted. But do stay tuned. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear your feedback and your opinions on this video and the topics I've explored. Even if you disagree with me, I'd love to know why. Take it easy.